everyone, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. This is our third local planning committee meeting for the Rochester DRI, and tonight we are going to just provide a couple of updates kind of on where we're at in the planning process. We have a public open house event coming up on May 4th. Which will be an important opportunity for anyone in the community to learn about these project proposals and let us know what they think. We have a couple updates to our office and housing market analyses, just work that'll help inform our review of the project proposals. And then we really want to spend most of the meeting tonight introducing the 14 project proposals that we received during the open call for projects that concluded in early April. So it's an exciting list of projects. We're really looking forward to starting the discussion tonight. And this is just the start of the discussion. Over the next couple of LPC meetings, we're going to go into a little more detail on each of these projects. And I'll talk a little bit about your role as LPC members to, help us understand what projects you feel are most transformative, most catalytic, tonight especially, what initial questions you might have about projects that we can explore either with the project sponsors or with other members of our planning team. So we'll talk a little bit about that process going forward. But these project proposals that we're going to introduce tonight really are going to be kind of the heart of the conversation for the next several LPC members meetings, ultimately leading to a list of recommended projects that will be part of our strategic investment plan. So without further ado, we will jump right in here. First, as I mentioned, we have our second public meeting coming up on Wednesday, May 4th. I really want to encourage all of our LPC members to help us spread the word. We have updated the city's webpage with this meeting information. We have sent out meeting information to a variety of different stakeholders, including probably some of you on this list. But just help us get the word out there, share, Facebook posts, share information via email and other meetings. We really do want to get as many people at this meeting, either in person or virtually online as possible. It'll be kind of a two-part meeting. We'll have an initial presentation that'll actually be similar to what we're going through tonight, kind of a brief introduction of the projects, and then kind of an open house gallery type format event where we'll have a summary of each of the projects for members of the community to learn more. Members of our planning team will be there so they can ask questions of us. And then we'll have a couple questions for people to weigh in on. Get a sense of projects they think are kind of top priorities to them or that they think would be particularly important for the DRI area. So this meeting is a really important opportunity for us to kind of understand where the community is with some of these projects, what they think about them. And that will be one of several factors that we'll be considering in future LPC meetings as we ultimately develop that list of projects. So additional meeting information is available on the City of Rochester's DRI webpage. You can see the address there at the bottom. So just appreciate your help in getting the word out for that. Another past event that we had was hosting office hours in the Sibley building on March 25th. Our promotion for that definitely helped raise awareness of the open call for projects, which was great. I was there from noon until 3 and pretty much talking with project sponsors the entire time. We had at least 15, maybe a few more people come in, some of which we had already known were interested in submitting a project proposal, others that were coming in for the first time to talk about their idea and learn more about the DRI. So it was a really great event in a wonderful space right there in the DRI. So good event, and I think helped to generate some of the list of project proposals that we'll talk about in just a bit. Up next, I wanted to provide just a brief update on two market studies, market analysis that members of our team have recently completed. And the first is on the downtown office market. In both cases, this study and the housing study, this is information that will help our team evaluate particularly the development project proposals that have come in. And I think in both cases, the news is encouraging, exciting. Starting off with the office market, the downtown Rochester office market is actually doing pretty well. I'll talk a little bit more on some future slides about that. But downtown, particularly at this moment in time, coming out of COVID and remote work and trying to get people back into hybrid work schedules and things like that, does actually have some key dynamics that are kind of working in its favor, including repositioning of some of the legacy office buildings, the big buildings downtown that have either been creatively reused as housing or something different, or have been updated and modernized for contemporary office space. There's also really an edge that downtown has for competitiveness as companies are increasingly wanting to go where their employees want to live and where they want to spend time. And so an exciting downtown environment like Rochester has been building and is continuing to improve on is a really important part for many companies' considerations in their kind of talent retention and recruitment. The residential development potential is actually another kind of key part of the office dynamic, because more people living downtown supports neighborhood services and the types of things that employees also want to have: places to eat, places to go out before and after work, conveniences that you can kind of stop and pick up on your way home, things like that. So the strength of the residential market actually is very helpful for the office market as well. The downtown innovation zone is another important dynamic for downtown office space. The accelerators and incubators there, companies that are starting off very small and looking to grow into bigger and bigger space over time. That is kind of a self-reinforcing virtuous cycle, which is really exciting. And then finally, just kind of the office demand for, kind of considered like cool space or cool places. And that goes back to kind of just the vibe of downtown and the number of interesting projects and places that are open today and that are in the pipeline. All of that is important for office relocation decisions. The analysis also identified some opportunities and constraints. I talked a little bit already about the workforce trends, employees looking for dynamic, interesting environments like Rochester has and is continuing to build. COVID and the hybrid work, phenomenon, trend, maybe long-term change is actually an opportunity too, because that reduces the parking demand that most offices have. And as offices particularly are looking to relocate from more suburban markets where they typically have plentiful free parking, parking downtown is much more expensive to provide. And so if you have to provide less of it, that is actually an opportunity for downtown. I mentioned a couple of the other ones here: the innovation district, residential development. Some of the constraints are just, the overall economy. We'll see on a couple other slides here that, Rochester is seeing job growth, but kind of at a moderate pace. Just the unknown continued impacts of COVID-19 for hybrid working versus remote working, and what does that mean? The limited base of retail and service amenities downtown, and that again is where a growing residential market will help to address that to some degree. And then, parking here constraint, as I mentioned, if you have to secure new parking, whether that's renting spaces in an existing garage or, even potentially building new, that is very expensive in a downtown environment. And so that is a constraint and a limitation. Quickly then, just a couple of interesting data points from that study. The first is that Rochester's job growth rate is bigger than some of the nearby larger cities, Buffalo and Syracuse, but is also somewhat significantly lagging the state and the nation overall. So, regionally a little bit more competitive, but compared to the state, still kind of lagging behind. And that's where that constraint of the Rochester economy comes into play. Looking forward at projected job gains between 2019, which is a pre-COVID figure, and 2031, some of the industries with the largest projected gains, in particular professional and business services, are ones that will drive office market absorption. And looking together at professional and business services, financial activities, and the information sector, those are ones that are projected to generate demand for upwards of 800 to 900,000 square feet of office demand by 2031. That is, making some assumptions that there will still be people working in offices, obviously, but it does show that there is, definitely potential there. This also shows the relative strength of leisure and hospitality industry as that starts to come back. That was very strong pre-COVID. It was one of the first industries to be hit very hard at the beginning of COVID, and so it's still working its way back. But the general perspective is that by the next couple of years, 2023, 2024, it's going to resume a pretty strong growth. And so that's where there'll start to be some more opportunities for those amenities like dining and places to eat, drink in downtown. So that does kind of support the DRI area as well. Downtown, obviously, it's a major supply of multi-tenant office space in the city. And kind of an interesting phenomenon over the last several years has been the conversion of Class B and Class C office space that was basically obsolete office space, largely vacant, hard to upgrade because it's just outdated. So there have been a number of conversions of those spaces to housing. And so that's helped reduce some of the inventory of vacant office space while also increasing residential development downtown. And this is some information that was provided to us by C.B. Richard Ellis and WZHA. So we appreciate that input. And then specifically focusing just on the Class A office space, downtown has actually been particularly strong in that of the overall absorption of Class A office space in the Rochester MSA. So it's including downtown and then the South Central and Southeast office submarkets. Downtown's accounted for 2/3 of the overall absorption since 2010. So over 500,000 square feet of office space have been absorbed in that 10 or 11 years. So that's a really strong story. It points to the competitive advantages of downtown. It points to employers and companies looking for an environment like downtown. And so that speaks strongly to the potential in the DRI, again, with the caveat that coming out of COVID and needing to be aware of the trends with hybrid work and where that is headed. But to the extent that a strong sense of place and lots of amenities can be supported downtown, that does help to bring workers back into the office. So before I get into the housing, just I know a number of people on the committee are very familiar with the dynamics of the downtown office market. So just any initial reactions or things that you would add to this based on your own experience in Rochester over the last several years. All right. And then moving on to housing. This was another one. This is work that was done for us by Zimmerman Volk Associates, and they were just very impressed with the strength of the downtown housing market. The number of buildings that have been renovated over the last 5 and 10 years, the projects that are in the pipeline, just the quality of the housing that's being constructed, the diversity of income levels, the amount of affordable and workforce housing that's been included in a number of projects. And as they look forward at demographic and mobility trends, where households are looking to move over time, they see continued strength in the downtown housing market. So I don't think that is a huge surprise for most of the people on the LPC here. But they, estimated based on they have kind of a proprietary model that looks at, relocation data, demographic trends, where people are wanting to live. It's kind of a forward-looking model rather than looking to the past and what's already happened. They project that over the next 5 years, downtown, and this is broader than just the DRI focus area, but downtown as a whole can support, anywhere from 1,400 to almost 1,900 additional housing units. of which, about 2/3 of those are probably affordable for households making at or above the area median income, and then the remaining third for households that are earning less than the area median income. So I think that, again, speaks strongly to the housing potential here. More residents downtown is more people out on the streets, supporting more restaurants, more shops, keeping parks and public spaces active and occupied throughout the day and the week. So that's all just continuing the momentum in downtown, I think, is a really strong and encouraging story to be able to tell. And there on the right there, you see kind of household types, pretty typical of most downtown areas as we look to future potential household types here. It's about 2/3 younger singles and couples, about 1/4 empty nesters and retirees, and then 9% traditional and non-traditional families. Those are typically very small families, maybe 2 or 3 person families there. So most of the market is in that younger singles and couples and empty nesters and retirees, which I think is largely kind of reflected in a lot of the rental units that are on the market today. So that's the quick recap of this. And again, how we're using this information is just to help us as we are evaluating project proposals and taking a look at the market studies that they have done to kind of just verify that and confirm that, yes, it's generally meeting the market need and in line with what we are also projecting. So it's a helpful bit of the profile there. So before we move on from this, any other, again, just kind of first impressions or reactions to this in terms of the housing market and what people have seen in downtown Rochester over the last few years?
I'll just jump in real quickly to add the report that is coming along with this is just a great report for those involved in the development world and for the city itself, going forward over the next, 5 years. Is really maintains its validity and can help, support different developments, and it can help developers, secure lending, et cetera. So this is, as I said in the beginning, a really good offset or a component of the DRI that is bigger than the DRI. So we work with Lori Vogt across the country. We've worked with her for 15 years, and she is really one of the best in the country. So this is good information. And one final thing, we got to try to get her to do a comparison. She was in Rochester, 20 years plus years ago, or 20 years ago, and we're going to do a comparison to see what she predicted back then and how strong, Rochester actually, or how well they've actually done. So that'll be a side piece and an interesting little addition to, what's going on in Rochester. So we'll work on that one to get that over at some point. It'll just be an interesting little factoid.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments on the housing or the office market pieces here? All right. Very quickly, I won't talk through these, but at our last meeting, we had a very good discussion around the goals and the strategies for the DRI area. So I'll just have these up on the screen. These are the revised strategies based on the conversation that we had at the last meeting. And, again, these are one of the criteria that we'll use to kind of qualitatively evaluate the project proposals to see, how well they are meeting the goals and the strategies that we've developed based on LPC feedback and input from the public at the first community meeting. So this will be one of the things that we will be looking at. So you see, just as a reminder here, the first goal about revitalizing East Main Street as well as downtown's other connective corridors, streets that kind of lead to Main Street, creating a vibrant urban center and an attractive green public realm. So, again, thinking about sustainability and resilience and how that can be integrated into the public realm as well as buildings. Increasing the amount of mixed use, mixed income housing downtown. So, I'd mentioned before, just there's already a pretty good diversity of housing types downtown. So continuing that and helping to fill in where there are, gaps or where there's a high demand and a low supply. So trying to meet that. Looking to increase emerging technology and creative class businesses. as well as supporting existing businesses and growing the downtown retail sector. Again, having more people living downtown and more office workers working downtown is a big part of supporting businesses and growing the retail sector. And then strengthening your reputation as a cultural center for the Finger Lakes region. So thinking about, events and programming and all of the great institutions that are already downtown, and how project proposals in the DRI can help to support those. So those are the 5 goals and the revised strategies that you see here. Those will be part of our strategic investment plan and part of the kind of qualitative evaluation process of the project proposals. So with that, I want to move now to really, as I said, kind of the heart of this meeting. This is introducing the project proposals. So without further ado, I mentioned we received 14. You see the list here. We'll go through just a brief summary of each of these. Total request of about $29 million. As a reminder, our goal as the local planning committee is to recommend a list of projects that equal about 15 million in DRI request. And so, as a committee with guidance from the planning team, we'll be kind of evaluating these projects over the next couple of months to really identify the strongest, most transformative, most catalytic, most ready to go projects that meet our goals, meet our strategies, address demonstrated needs, and really see those rise up to the top to that list of recommended projects. This is a map of where those projects fall. And so you see there is, definitely a cluster of exciting activity happening between the RTS Transit Center and Main Street, particularly in that block, those 2 blocks between St. Paul and North Clinton. There are a couple project proposals outside of that kind of core area. So really, I think, exciting to see all of these project proposals come in and the potential that they have. So great starting point. And this, as I said before, is really what we're going to be talking about over the next several meetings. And so in terms of just that process and what that looks like, as a reminder, we're working towards submitting the final strategic investment plan at the end of July this summer. That strategic investment plan will have the list of recommended DRI projects totaling, around $15 million in requested DRI funds, that the different state agencies who are involved in this will then, kind of further evaluate and make the final selection for the 9.7 million in DRI funding. So kind of working backwards from that, this meeting tonight is really just an introduction to get people's initial reactions. Our next meeting in mid-May is going to happen after our public meeting. So we'll have a sense of the community's kind of perspective and support for specific project proposals.
Hey, Phil. Oh, sorry. I know, sorry to interrupt, but next meeting we should talk about, because I think there's going to be a major conflict with someone's retirement party.
Oh, the meeting on the 18th. All right.
On the 18th. Yeah. So we should discuss that at the end of your presentation, but I wanted to flag that now because you mentioned that date.
All right. We will do that. So mid-May, generally, next meeting, that'll be going through the project proposals in a little bit more detail, focusing on more of a qualitative review, things that are more about kind of transformative capacity, catalytic capacity of projects. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the other criteria. Then in May, we'll go back through the projects with a focus on some of the more technical details. So our planning team includes a number of partner firms we're working with that are going to help us take a look at things like the cost estimates that development projects are proposing, the real estate pro formas for development projects, helping to evaluate the economic impacts or the retail component of projects. So our team members are going to be working on that over the next couple of weeks and months. As we need to, we'll be going back to project sponsors to ask for more information or to have, discussions to kind of clarify aspects proposal. And so that information is going to feed into this sort of technical review. And we'll be setting up and using a matrix to help evaluate each of these projects. Our team will kind of make our recommendations to say, here's where we think this project falls in terms of the, cost estimates and the job creation and the economic benefits, and, talk about that, then use that matrix as a discussion starting point for committee members to talk about projects. And then we'll be looking to finalize that list of $15 million in DRI funding requests by late June, early July, and that'll give us time then to finalize the strategic investment plan. So that's kind of our roadmap for where we're headed over the next couple of months.
Phil, this is Heidi Zimmermeyer. I've got a question about that timeline.
Sure.
I'm a little confused by that last piece. What are we ultimately submitting? All 15, or are we submitting what we think will total 9.7 million? And then that goes up the line to the state. What is it we're meant to be doing?
The local planning committee will be recommending a list of projects that totals about $15 million in DRI requests. And then the state will evaluate those and make the final award decisions for the 9.7 million. So the first step is kind of whittling it down. Right now we have about 29 million in DRI requests.
Oh,
so
okay. Yeah.
Recommending a list of projects that totals, around 15 million. And then that gets submitted to the state agencies and they'll continue their review to make the final award decisions for the 9.7 million.
So it's possible, are we meant to be setting any kind of local priorities? I mean, we're meant to whittle it down to some degree, almost half. And then within that, are we meant to be identifying priorities? You talked about transformative and catalytic projects. Are we being expected to weigh in on those sorts of issues before the 15 million roughly in projects go on to the state for review?
That will be integrated into part of each of the projects. Will have a profile within the strategic investment plan, and that will talk about the transformative capacity, the catalytic capacity of projects. So, that'll be informed by the LPC discussion, by our team's evaluation of that. There is not a ranking of projects within that list of $15 million requests. There's specifically not a ranking in that, and then the state makes the final kind of evaluation based on the projects that are strongest, able to do the contracting with the state agency, are most ready to go.
Thanks.
Chris, is there anything else you would add in terms of that process?
No, you covered it well. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, great. Any other questions in terms of kind of the process and what we'll be doing over the next few meetings? This next slide, actually next two, talk a little bit more about that too. We'll be providing a kind of proposal evaluation. It's kind of a worksheet, but it's really just meant to be a discussion starter. This won't be, homework that we're looking for you to fill out for each of the projects, but it'll be a list of the things that are part of those project profiles that will be strategic investment plan, and things that we do want to talk about in upcoming meetings. And so it's meant to be kind of qualitative guidance on just the benefits that each of these projects may offer. It is not meant to be a final vote or anything like that. It really is just a discussion tool. And some of the things that we'll be looking for kind of input and discussion on, and these are things that we can start to discuss tonight as we go through these projects. How well are projects aligned with the vision and the goals that we just covered? The state also has DRI goals, and those are largely kind of reflected in our local goals, but we want to make sure that projects are addressing those as well. As we get community input on these, particularly at the second public meeting, we'll want to take a look at that, take that into consideration. Two, that we provide a little more information there at the bottom, the transformative potential of projects. That's one important criteria, and that's really about projects that have the kind of demonstrated potential to really make a positive improvement on the experience of being downtown and also its perception, that sense of really kind of making a visible change. And then catalytic potential, the demonstrated potential of a project to spur further investment. And so there's kind of two ways to look at that. One is within each of the project proposals. One of the things we'll be looking at is kind of leverage. So looking at the amount of the DRI request to the total amount of other funds that the sponsor is bringing to the project. So that might be, private investment or debt, but also other state grants and awards, historic tax credits, energy efficiency grants, any other funding sources they're bringing to bear. Because one thing we want is this 9.7 million of DRI funds to leverage several times that in private and other funding. But then the other side of that is just projects that have kind of spillover effects that will support other things that are going on downtown, that'll encourage other development to happen, give confidence to more investors and property owners to make improvements to their properties. So that idea of being a catalyst for additional change beyond the DRI is another important criteria. So these are some things I just asked committee members as you're hearing about each of the projects tonight to keep in mind, and this will be some of the things that we'll start to talk about. So I'm looking at the time here, we'll spend with 14 project proposals. We have a good bit to get through. So we'll spend a few minutes on each one, but it would be really great to hear from committee members kind of your initial impression of projects, the ones that you're particularly excited about, but also questions you have. As I mentioned, over the next couple of months, our team will be working with project sponsors to clarify things, get more information. And so any questions that you have as well, now is your first opportunity to ask those, so we can work on getting some answers. So with that, we have a series now of just one slide per project that summarizes just some of the key information from the project proposals. The forms we got, were anywhere from 10-ish pages to, much more than that with supporting information. So we're just trying to kind of provide an initial introduction. So we'll start with first project, and these are in no particular order just yet. The first project is the Alta Vista at St. Joseph's Park. This is a transformation of 4 vacant lots currently parking into a 6-story mixed-use building that would have affordable housing, including 14 supportive units that would be reserved for people who are recovering from substance abuse disorders or mental health recovery, or I believe they also mentioned supportive housing for victims of domestic violence. So having kind of a social component to that. The project does also include some improvements to St. Joseph's Park, as well as a bit of commercial space that would be leased out by the Landmark Society of New York. So you see some of the stats here in terms of the total project cost estimate of around 32 million, requesting 2 million in DRI funding. Site control, they are working to finalize that. They're negotiating with the property owners now. Site control is one of the important DRI criteria because we are looking for projects that can get started quickly. So there are several project proposals that don't have final site control yet, but are in negotiations. And so, one of the things we'll just be looking for updates from project sponsors is, have you finalized that agreement? Do you have site control? So that's the first project here. I know we had one committee member who had, or two perhaps, who had to recuse themselves from any discussion of this, but from the other committee members, just any initial reactions to this in terms of the type of project that's being proposed. It's, specifically thinking about transformative potential or catalytic potential, how well it's addressing a need you see downtown. Any initial thoughts on that? And again, this is just the beginning of a conversation, but would love to hear just any initial thoughts.
So Phil, I guess this is a question I brought up before, and I'm just wondering where in the process this will happen. When will we be able to see like the proposed budget? 'Cause I know that the last time the city spoke with Ibero, they had pretty much all their funding. I know with supply chain issues, the funding could have changed, but it'd be interesting to see, if this is a make or break, DRI funding would be a make or break for this project or any other project. It'd just be helpful to have that kind of background.
Mhm. Yes, all of the financing and funding information are part of the project proposals. Our team will be reviewing that, and we'll certainly flag that as a question to follow up on, and we can provide some more information at one of the next couple of meetings.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Phil, what is the site specifically that gray parking lot area? Or is it, does it go into that green lawn area also?
It is the parking area here, and then I believe of the 2 million there of the DRI request, yes, the portion of that 150,000 would actually be to make some improvements to the park around the historic former church there.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Phil, this is Lisa. I have a question. Is the Landmark Society planning on moving from their current location into this building? Or are they going to be using it for event space?
I believe it is primarily meant as an event space that they would lease out. And I'd have to go back to the application, to the proposal to see if, I don't believe they would be moving their office space there. I
don't believe they will either. They just moved and they're out in the.
Yeah, that's what I remember. Yeah, they just made that big move.
It's supplemental. It's supplemental space for St. Joseph's Park so that they could host larger events and access to bathrooms and things like that.
Yep. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
I would, you were asking about impact and connection maybe to overall goals. Having a project this far along, and I know the site control hasn't been finalized, but this is not only a housing project and an affordable housing project, which it is both, but it's also going into an area of downtown that has really stalled. So I think on several fronts, it should score highly on, I think, the transformative, and I have to go back to that definition because I might have defined that a little bit more broadly, but I do think it has that aspect, and I do think the project will end up being catalytic for this part of downtown, which has not seen the level of redevelopment and investment that broad strokes of downtown have in the last 20 years or so. So I would suggest that because it's a housing project, it's providing affordable housing, and that it has the capacity to be both transformative and catalytic for this part of downtown, which has been kind of a dead zone. That when you are putting all these factors up for each project, this one should score highly on those.
This is Lisa again. I just want to piggyback on what Heidi said. If you look at the map, I mean, it leverages what's going to go on in the inner loop, right? It's right there, right next to, the potential development that will be coming. And I think it's pretty exciting project.
Yeah, those are all great points. Anyone else on this one? Great, thank you very much. So this is exactly the type of questions and input we're looking for as we go through and just introduce these projects. So the next one, and this is actually one of two, possibly in a DRI first, at least in my own experience, we actually have two project proposals for the same group of 4 buildings on the corner of Clinton and Main. So this is an example of over the course of the next couple of months, we'll be looking for the project sponsors to give us some updates on, things like site control, who's partnering with who, what is the final form of these projects. So of these two, only one would be able to go forward, and that may look different from what this initial proposal is. But so the first proposal for these 4 buildings on the corner is to transform them into, to keep the buildings, to rehab them into 10 to 12 market rate apartments on the upper floors, 4 retail spaces at the sidewalk level. In this one, the sponsor currently owns 2 of the 4 buildings, owns the 2 right on the corner, and is in kind of negotiations, hoping to get control of the other 2. So that is one of the big kind of questions that would have to be resolved. The request here is for about $3.5 million in DRI requests for a total project cost of $9 million to really update this corner here. And I'm going to talk about the second project as well, and then we can go back and talk about both of these. So the second proposal here for these same 4 buildings is by a sponsor who currently has a purchase and sale agreement for 2 of the 4 properties. So those would be kind of I'll call them the L outer properties here. So the ones not right on the corner. And is in negotiations with the owner of the other 2 buildings. So they're trying to figure out kind of which way this is going to go. But this current proposal would be for all 4 buildings to create 11 apartments on those upper floors, 4 sidewalk level commercial spaces. The DRI request is for $5 million out of a total project cost of just over $10 million. For these buildings on the corner. So again, these 2 proposals are definitely ones that are going to evolve and change over the next couple of months. We'll be looking to the sponsors, checking in with them to see how those negotiations are going, what the ultimate form of this project proposal will look like. But 2 proposals for this corner that, I think, many people would feel strongly about wanting to see something happen here. So I'll flip back to the first proposal here, and just any initial thoughts or questions on these 2 proposals.
I have a question, Phil. Is there any requirements or thoughts on the ratio from DRI requested funds to total project costs?
The DRI request can't be more than 40% of the total project cost, unless there is a significant, I believe it's energy efficiency upgrade, in which case they could request up to 50% of the total project cost.
Okay.
And Phil, I just want to interrupt, and we do have somewhat of a late update on that guidance which we gave you guys. It's the 40% as a target. If it's a significant project, it's in the LPC can recommend a little higher.
How do you define significant? Meaning in terms of impact, or?
Well, there's no hard formula for it, unfortunately. Okay. Yeah, so it's kind of like one of those, when you see it. And is this in comparison, like to the first project, is this project as or more transformational than that project? Can you justify going above that 40% based on that sort of thing? So it's, when we go through these projects after, during these next few months, we will be going through them and trying to see what projects are good candidates for decarbonization, and being able to take advantage of the nice sort of goals. And but that's a part of it. But also the 40%, it's not a brick wall anymore. We initially thought that was going to be a hard stop. It's a little more fluid, but it's still a good target. But I would just say if we want to recommend something a little higher, if it comes in at 40.5, I'm not worried. If we want to go 49, 50, we want to make sure that this is a real top-notch project when we start going through these things, and we'll know them when we see them.
Mhm.
Will
And my
the
follow-
team? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just
Lauren.
have one other quick question. The second proposal on this also maintains the facade of these 4 buildings. This is a rehab, not a demolition and rebuild, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Both would keep the facades and then obviously renovate those as well as the interiors.
Thank you.
Will you guys, in your technical review, which you showed on one of the other slides, be looking at developer capacity?
Yes,
Track record, the ability to handle difficult projects? And also with the second proposal, the home leasing one,
Mhm.
is that 5 million a gap? Without that, the project can't move forward? I mean, do you have any sense of how to evaluate that gap question?
We have
Select
not
board.
really dug into the details of that yet, but that's one of the things that WZHA on our team will in particular be taking a look at, is looking at the project pro forma, the sources and funding sources and uses to kind of vet that and, check particularly some of their assumptions in that to make sure they are reasonable, and, we'll then flag anything that might raise a question. And as Chris had mentioned, that's some of the follow-up conversations then with project sponsors, is to revisit things like that if we need to.
And
the
And
sponsor,
also developer capacity, are you going to be addressing that at all?
yes, that's another piece of the one of the criteria we're looking at. We requested with the open call for projects to submit kind of a explanation, demonstration of their capacity, past projects, personal experience, things like that. So we'll be vetting that as well, and where we need to, again, following up to get more information. But that's definitely an important criteria as well, because again, we want to make sure that the sponsor is able to do what they say they're going to do, and so capacity is an important part of that.
And-
Two additional questions, or one comment and one question. Is it possible that if, in this case, for example, one of these were to go forward based on the technical review and the committee's work and all that, and in either case, because they're asking for a pretty big chunk of the 10 million or the 9.7 million, is it possible that it would go up as requested to the state and the state would reduce the grant to that project? Is that likely to happen at that level?
I can say that that sort of thing has happened. And I'm looking at this, and I'll just use this as an example just because it's up on the screen. A $5 million DRI ask for one project is not common. And to say that it might impact its competitiveness, I think it will. How much, I can't say. It's one of those things where, as the LPC, if everyone is comfortable with it, and let's say it gets on the slate and it's recommended, and this is the form this project takes. If you are uncomfortable with a DRI ask, that can be communicated back to the project sponsor.
So that gets to the question about what's the actual gap funding need, not.
Let's drill down to it. Yeah, because you can say, listen, guys, this is going to impact how this project moves forward. Can we sharpen our pencils a little bit? Can we shift things around? Can we really reanalyze this and see how we can repackage it and make it a little more competitive? Because one level is here at the LPC, the second level is at the state, and I don't recall ever seeing a project getting awarded at that level.
So
There have
Chris,
been close, but not quite at 5.
so to that point, there haven't been a lot of larger city DRIs.
True.
So would that be part of the equation as well?
Yeah.
Just because it hasn't been funded
Yeah.
at that amount, just because large cities probably need more,
Yeah.
funding.
Yeah, it's got to look into it. You're right, Tammy. All that stuff comes into play.
Yeah.
I think the last large project that was pretty close to this was in Batavia, and that was the health center project partnership with the YMCA and the hospital, and that was
Gotcha.
a $4 million award, I believe. So pretty close. really. But that was the project, one of the projects. I mean, that's a significant one. So it's just one of those things. You bring a very good point. You're right. Rochester's probably one of the bigger cities that we've ever done with this program. So that will come into play. But again, we still only have 9.7. Is this going to be the impact one project? It's something we got to talk about as we go through this.
I would suggest that either version of this, this was kind of ground zero for local concern, is this corner. So in terms of its impact and its, its transformational aspect, I think is extraordinarily high for either option on this site. And I think there's a lot of emotion wrapped around, quote, solving the northwest corner of Main and Clinton.
And may I just add one thing? It's Anna Silvatella, that it'll probably come down to site control in the end. We'll just have to keep an eye on that because that is the key situation in these two proposals.
That's what I was going to ask, Anne. Are the two proposals, the two buildings that each proposal control, are they the opposite, or is there crossover on willing to sell?
Well,
Or are you allowed to
I
disclose?
think we'll talk about that offline.
Okay.
One party has a purchase agreement for two buildings and the other party owns the two other buildings.
Okay.
So it's a situation.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Do you know if there's a timeline for a decision that they're proposing or that we would press them to propose in order to be considered for this funding? I know that there's obviously a timeline for us to consider the funding, but are they aware and working towards that?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and the site control is an important criteria because without site control, it's hard to say that your project is ready to go. So that would make it not very competitive for DRI funding. And so looking towards, kind of a June timeframe, really late May, early June, to know for sure which way this is going will be necessary so that you, the committee, know what the final project proposal is that you are deciding whether or not to recommend for funding.
And yes, the developers are aware of that timeline for site control.
Yeah, and for something like this, and it really depends how the project list, evolves over these next few months. If we have a large ask like this that is still kind of in limbo, and if we want to move it forward, we might bump up that $15 million target. Because if it, for some reason, a project like this wouldn't, and it falls out for whatever reason, that you don't have a lot of flexibility left. So we'll just see how it plays out as we go along. The 15 million is a target. It can go higher depending on how the makeup of the projects that we see. So.
All right, I'm gonna keep us moving along just because we have a lot more projects to talk about. But those are, I think, great questions, and thank you again for the input on that. So the next project is one of two project proposals submitted by the City of Rochester. This first one is called Main Street Commons, and this is to create an outdoor public and pedestrian space in between Main and Division Street to break up that block of Main Street and to create an outdoor space that can then be shared with the buildings on either side. The goals here are kind of enhancing pedestrian circulation, perception of safety, creating more space for outdoor dining and places to do programming and things like that. This is a DRI request of 1.3 million out of a total project cost estimated at 1.5. A lot of times public projects in DRI do have a higher request to total cost ratio. It's not always the case, but it definitely has happened before. And so this is another one. They're in conversations to acquire the building that is currently there. if they're able to do that, the proposal would be to demolish it and then to improve this as a pedestrian space that could then also, in terms of kind of catalytic potential, support redevelopment of the buildings on either side as well.
So technically, I guess I should recuse myself since the city of Rochester is a sponsor. So I'm noting that for myself.
For public projects, that won't be necessary. 'Cause
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Just wanted to clarify.
No, thank you.
Any initial reactions or thoughts to this, and thinking specifically of the transformative or catalytic potential of a project like this?
I'd like to know about a bit more about the backside of, where this kind of dumps out on Division Street. It would, right now, Division Street's very much kind of an alleyway with garbage collection and rear access to some of these buildings, but just wondering about what that looks like, or what the future of that would look like.
And that is talked about in a couple of other project proposals. The other city project, which we'll actually talk about next, does propose an element that would collect all of those dumpsters and trash and recycling containers into one central location to try to get rid of that element from Division Street. And then as we'll look at some of the other private development project proposals in this block, I think there is a sense that there probably at some point in the future would need to be kind of a bigger streetscape project on Division Street once it gets dug up for utility improvements and things like that for other projects. So that's definitely part of the consideration for this, and we can probably share a little bit more either in these other project introductions or at future meetings.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is Lisa. I had a quick question too. So it would involve tearing down the existing building?
Yes, there's a narrow one-story building that's there today. It's not a historic building, but it would require the demolition of that.
Got it.
I would just add that for decades, there's been a long-held belief that this super block is not human scale. And there has been a desire among many people over the years to see this particular site bisect the block and create a more human space that would create a really great kind of vitality in the middle of the block. So this is an amazing way to achieve that in just on first blush. Very compelling. And very keen to see the treatment of Division Street in the next project, because we meet monthly with my counterparts across the state outside of New York City. And there's been a lot of discussion about how to handle alleyways and how to create spaces and alleys that end up adding net value to street life in a really great way. And with this piece, connecting to that, as Lauren just referenced, that may create a very unusual opportunity to rethink Division Street once all the utility dig ups are done and repaired and the trash receptacles are handled in some clever way. There may be some other funders that could come in and help do catenary lighting, that kind of thing, just to create a space that's very different. You could have food vendors, temporary food vendors, for example, and cafe seating. I mean, there are just a lot of ways to rethink.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, I think. And we've certainly seen during the pandemic as well, those kind of forgotten about spaces in downtowns of all sizes being thought of more creatively to provide outdoor seating or event space. And there are ways to do that, pretty inexpensively and quickly, and then, longer term, more permanent improvements as well. So it's a great observation. Anyone else? All right. So the next project on the list is the city's second proposal. This is the Mortimer Street Plaza. This is located on basically the backside of the Mortimer Street garage. There's a secondary entrance and exit there today, but otherwise, not much there. And so this proposal is sort of a streetscape overhaul here to add electric vehicle car share stations, as well as fast charging stations for electric vehicles. So privately owned electric vehicles could park here, charge up, and then go on. And this is the one that I mentioned also then would use part of this space to create a shared dumpster enclosure. So something that would be screened off, and then part of that would be working out a kind of management agreement with property owners across Division Street so that their trash and recycling would go into that enclosure and be picked up in one stop rather than the individual dumpsters that are there today. So it's kind of a multifaceted project here. And this is the one that specifically mentioned that any other bigger improvements to Division Street to make it less alley-like and more pedestrian-friendly would just sequence-wise happen after the major utility improvements that likely would be needed to accommodate some of the other private development projects that are being contemplated in this block. Any initial thoughts on this one? I would note that this one does certainly have a prominent kind of sustainability and energy efficiency component with the electric vehicle, both car share and charging stations. It's one of a couple projects where that is a significant element.
Does the city currently own that far of the lot line?
Yes, that's actually part of the parcel that the parking garage is on.
So the ingress egress for vehicles is from Mortimer or from Division?
For this is kind of the back entrance to the garage, so it would come from Division. So you can kind of see here that there would be the curb cut on Division Street with an exit point here and an entry point closer to Mortimer.
So it would go through the garage in and out?
It's to access the garage, yes.
But you don't have to go into the garage to utilize the charging station or the car, the electric car rental. It is just the alternative entrance and exit to the garage. The normal exit and entrance from the garage would typically be from the front on Clinton.
Mm-hmm. Correct, yes.
And to just expand on the other point that was made, we do believe that in a future budget for road repairs and updates, that if we are able to get the dumpsters and other kinds of things like that off of Division Street, that we would be able to redo Division Street in a way that we certainly can't make it any wider because the buildings aren't going anywhere. But we do believe that we could improve the walkability of it by possibly making one side of the street wider in terms of sidewalk space and providing less alley-like view to the pedestrians that might be approaching either from the car charging or from, if in fact the other walkway was created, that it would be more accessible and more attractive.
Dana, just a question about logistics. Goes to show maybe how ignorant I am about this. This is where the back sides of the buildings that now front on Main Street, primarily maybe Edwards Building, which fronts on St. Paul.
Yes, that's correct.
They would, staff from those buildings would pull trash receptacles to put into dumpsters. They pull them down the alley to get to where the, so wintertime, how does that mean that that alley would have a much higher snow and ice removal treatment?
Well, that's certainly something that would have to be looked at. Obviously, you're correct, Heidi. In the winter, when there is significant snow or anything that would hinder that, we would have to make accommodations, yes.
Any other closing thoughts on this for right now? Excuse me. All right.
Well, I just had a question. I know that there was a comment made earlier about what percentage of the total cost could the DRI request be, and this is certainly higher than 40%. Is that something that needs to be adjusted to make this at all to be considered?
Public projects and nonprofits are eligible to go up to 100%.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, and then I guess back to the question or the comment that Tammy made earlier, given that both she and I are representing the city of Rochester, do we need to recuse ourselves from this? You said earlier, since it was a public project, we didn't, so.
No, public projects you don't. That you're not receiving anything personally. The only time it would come into play is if this, hypothetically, if the city was going to buy a property that you own, let's say.
Okay.
Yeah, that sort of thing. But it's a public project. There's a public benefit. That's you don't need to recuse yourself.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Chris.
All right. So to keep us moving along, next project on the list here is called Experience Live Downtown Digital Media. So this actually is a third project proposal submitted for those 4 buildings on the corner of Clinton and Main. And this is a proposal to install some LED high definition video billboards and solar panel equipment. So to have a sustainable energy component to this, to the exterior of those buildings on the corner that would then be used for local news, weather, advertisements for community events. In the project proposal form, the sponsor just talks about kind of the energy and interest that they think this would generate. And so for this one, they are requesting $500,000 in DRI fund out of a total project cost of a little over $1 million. They would be working with the owner of that building, obviously, to make this project happen. So you see here, this is a historic image of what that corner used to look like, with a very large billboard there. So this would be kind of the updated, high definition, vivid color, video billboard that would be added to the building. So any initial thoughts on this one in terms of transforming the perception of downtown, catalytic potential interface with the other 2 project proposals that we've talked about for those buildings?
Are we to assume that if this one were to be funded, the other 2 could not be, because you can't put housing behind this, at least in the corner building?
Mm-hmm.
That would make it impossible to have housing units in the upper floors?
That is actually probably a very good question to follow up on how that would work. Obviously, it would make it very hard to have occupied space behind there. So that'll be a follow-up question for the project sponsors to see if they can talk a little bit more about that.
Maybe an either-or situation, either housing or this.
To that point, did Rock City Leasing discuss this with the other applicants? I mean, that's probably not something you would know.
I know this, Tammy.
Oh.
I happen to know that Rock City Leasing is the person behind that is the GC to one of the other applicants. So the assumption is that they've talked about it. But I have another question, Phil. I think maybe to check back in with the applicant is for them to check in with our zoning folks to see whether this will actually be, their proposal will be permitted.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I was going with it, Ann.
Yeah.
They did highlight one of the questions in the project proposal form is regulatory requirements. They mentioned obviously signage requirements. They didn't really provide much detail. And so that's on our list of follow-up questions, and just looking to see it's certainly a very high proportion of signage here. So there might be some issues that would need to be resolved on the regulatory side.
And just thinking through this, like kind of like what Heidi was getting at too, an either or. You would hate to spend a lot of money renovating and restoring a building and then just to cover it. So it's going to be a challenge if you wanted to try to do both at the same time. It would be interesting to see how that would actually happen. So interested to hear what the sponsor has to say about feasibility. Upper floors, residential, office. Can they coexist? Do they have some kind of agreement to do this anyway? And the zoning. Yeah, these are all great points. And it's a couple of them are kind of if the answer is no, it kind of almost remove the project, because you got to be zoned for it. Is it likely that it would receive a variance? I don't know. So anyway, a lot of exploring on this one. This is gonna be interesting.
I also have just another comment on this, because the existing use says 90% unused former billboard, but that leads one to believe that maybe there's these billboards still there. They just happen to be blank, when in fact that whole infrastructure was removed, as we saw in the previous picture. So there are no unused former billboards that remain on these buildings, not the one that's on top of the building that you can just see the bottom of,
right,
and not the ones that cover up the front and side of the building. All of those were removed. So there are no unused former billboards on the location right now.
That's a good point as well. All right, there's nothing else on this one. We'll move on. Number 7 on our list, again in no particular order. This is for project proposal to adaptively reuse and renovate the Cox building, which is on the corner there of St. Paul and Mortimer, across from the RTS Transit Center. This would restore both the exterior and the interior to create 85 new apartments, 3 retail storefronts. They are requesting in their proposal $3.5 million out of a total project cost of just over $31 million. So the project proposal details some of the improvements that they would make to rooftop spaces, tenant spaces, potential storefront tenants and all. But this would be a renovation of a significant building in that block. And so any questions or initial reactions in terms of transformative capacity and catalytic capacity?
Are these market rate, or are they affordable units?
I believe these would be mostly market rate. One of the new criteria for the DRI in this round 5 is that residential project proposals do need to have some affordable component. So we may need maybe a follow-up question for them to see, what, how they would be addressing that.
Is there a plan for parking for residents?
I will have to go back to the proposal to see what they say about it. I know that they particularly highlighted the adjacency to the RTS Transit Center, the adjacency to the Mortimer Street Garage, as well as having, I believe, indoor storage for bicycles. So the proposal presents this as really encouraging kind of a car light or even car-free lifestyle downtown. So I think they would be hoping that most people who are choosing to live here are not bringing 2 cars with them. But they do believe the proposal does have some more information on that. Any other questions or thoughts on this one in terms of transformative or catalytic potential? All right, so we're halfway through our list here. Next up is a project proposal to create an Albert Paley archives and exhibition space at Sibley Square. Albert Paley was a local, or is a local, artist and craftsperson. This would be in partnership with RIT. They're in the process of trying to acquire some of his archives and his work. So this would create a storefront exhibition space similar to RIT's city space that exists today. That would be used to display some of his work and other community pieces as part of an exhibit. And then there would be an associated archives with that in the project proposal, they mentioned, RIT, undergraduate and graduate students would be able to use. They would, reach out and hope that Rochester City School students could also, have access to that to learn more. So meant to be kind of a community-facing piece. This is requesting $1 million out of the total project cost of 2.8. That would be used primarily to renovate the storefront space. The project sponsor describes it as really still being in its kind of original, really unusable condition right now. And so the DRI funds would be necessary to bring it up to modern standards. And, so that's kind of the justification for the ask. So any initial thoughts on this one here to create kind of a storefront exhibition and archive space here?
Could you describe again exactly where this is? It's on the Liberty Pole Plaza? Because RIT has an existing space and there's bank space. I'm trying to picture where. Do you have a sense?
It would be I believe an existing storefront there. I don't recall exactly where it is in the building, but it's an existing vacant space there.
That faces outward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Heidi, I asked the same question because I saw this picture and I was wondering if it was replacing the Liberty Pole, but that's just a different, just a random picture.
That's
right next to the RIT space.
Paley's work, yeah.
Yeah.
Heidi, there's about a 5,000 square foot space that is just behind the bank as you go along Franklin Street. So, the front of the building on Main Street has the DGX store and then the bank. And then as you turn the corner, there's the other side of the bank. And then behind that, there's a commercial space.
So it must be adjacent to the RIT gallery space?
Mhm.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments on this? All right. Next up is another development proposal. This is the Edwards Building redevelopment and geothermal cooperative. So this project has kind of 2 elements to it. One is to renovate this existing building that kind of bridges over the Division Street to create 114 market rate apartments, as well as some commercial space. And then adjacent to it, so this vacant lot is between that existing building and the Mortimer Street Plaza project proposal from the city that we talked about a couple slides ago. That vacant lot formerly had a parking garage. And the proposal would be to drill 111 geothermal wells that could then be used to deliver heating and cooling to this building, which they're calling the Edwards building, as well as 3 and potentially more buildings in this block. So again, this is one of a couple of projects that does have a kind of a prominent sustainability, energy efficiency, decarbonization element to it. This one, they are requesting, the project sponsor is requesting 2.75 million out of a total project cost estimated around 36 million. And it would be another redevelopment proposal within that block that we've been talking about. Any thoughts on this one in terms of transformative or catalytic capacity, or questions that LPC members may have?
I just have 2 comments. This is Dana. First of all, it is transformative. The old, the old Edwards department store was facing Main Street and backed up to Division Street, and this was the warehouse that supplied the store. So it's really of very little use, and has been of very little use for many, many years. So it would be, I think, exciting to, as it looks like here, create apartments and windows, and be able to utilize that space. So that's great. The other, I guess, just a question is, I know that they are currently working on another building across the street from there, the Glennie building, and they have another building a little bit farther down the street. Now, my understanding was that they've already drilled these 111 geothermal wells, which are going to currently be used for heating and cooling of the Glennie building, but had capacity to support other buildings, including this one and the one at the corner of Division and North Clinton. So it's probably not maybe correct to say that drilling these wells is a new project. It's, I believe, already completed, but we can get that clarified, I guess.
Dana, did the developer already drill for 111 GMO?
Yes.
They all of them have already been done.
Yes.
So is that eligible then?
No, no, it would, we'll have to get that called out in the budget. And since it's already done, it's done. What else, future is what we're going to be looking at is for DRI funding.
Right.
Right.
So we just need to verify that. I mean, I know that they had planned to drill the 111. I know that we had to give them permits because they also had to drill under Division Street to be able to connect the wells in the lot, which is their lot, the vacant lot. And we had to give them permission to go under the street to get to the Glennie building. But it was my understanding that they had already drilled the wells. So.
Hey, Dana, do you got other projects that have done something like this in Rochester? I've never seen something to this scale, so I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, the only one I'm aware of is the Medical Arts building over on Alexander Street. Years ago, did geothermal wells to do heating and cooling in the building, and that was kind of the first one we had seen, and it's been, relatively trouble-free and has worked quite well. But this, the folks doing this, Dutton Properties in particular, they're very creative folks. They're always looking for ways to, utilize new technology. So this geothermal is actually a really interesting and exciting thing.
Yeah, it's cool.
And if it turns out that they haven't, for whatever reason, drilled all of those wells, the ability to create like a mini, I think about it like a mini Fairport, which has its own system, that this is kind of remarkable and could be a really interesting pilot for a lot of other parts of the city.
And the sponsor's project proposal that we'll go back and confirm how many of the wells have been drilled. Absolutely. I believe in the proposal, they said they had drilled some test wells. So I don't know if the full complement have been done or not, but we will clarify that. And they did also mention in the proposal that the geothermal consultants that they're working with who have done, you know, other projects are not aware of something kind of this scale that would be shared among several buildings in a close location. So they do talk a little bit about that potential to be kind of a model for, you know, carbon-free heating and cooling in a district beyond just a specific building. So those are definitely important details that we'll follow up in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we shouldn't let this pass without noting that this is also a housing project.
Yeah.
And I know that we've got market rate identified in their requirements for some percentage of affordable, which probably needs to be, you know, clarified more. But again, this is another housing project in a building that, as Dana said, has been empty for a very long time. And it's a beautiful building.
Mm-hmm.
So that, you know, similar to Alta Vista, these are two projects, and the couple of the proposals for Main and Clinton, the northwest corner, would actually create housing out of dead buildings in these.
Right. Yeah. That's a great model as we continue to build affordable housing. You know, obviously affordable housing, part of it is the rent, but the other part of it is the utilities. And if this model can be utilized for other housing complexes, it would probably reduce the utilities costs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious if it would supply heating and cooling to other buildings or just the ones that they own. You know, would it be available? Would there be capacity for other buildings to utilize the infrastructure that they're building, or would it just be for the 3+ buildings that they own in that?
I believe in the project proposal that right now they envision it being for the other couple of properties that they own nearby. But that can be a follow-up capacity question about the capacity of the wells and whether it could accommodate other buildings.
Sure.
And if they're talking about 3, they only own 2 other buildings in addition to Edwards. So what is the other building?
It might be in the process of, I don't know, acquiring others.
So this project sponsor actually submitted, I believe, 4 project proposals. We're going to go through those in the next couple of slides. And I believe at least one of those they're in the process of acquiring, they don't currently own. I am looking at our time here, knowing that we want to save time for a public comment period at the end. So I'm going to keep moving ahead so we can get through the rest of the project proposals. This one here is for the Kresge building, which would be next to the city's Main Street Commons project proposal. And this would redevelop that historic building into a small boutique hotel and restaurant with event space adjacent to that Main Street Commons building. This is one, as noted here on the bottom. They don't currently control the property, but they do have a purchase and sale agreement that they're looking to close by this summer. So they're in the process for that. And for this project, they are requesting 1.75 million in DRI funds out of a total project cost of 11.7. Any initial reactions to this one or questions that we can follow up with the sponsor on?
If they don't close until July, is that past our timeline of when, if they don't have control of the site by the time we make our decision?
It'd be close. If this turns out to be one of the projects you get, the committee really wants to put on the slate, you know, they would have till really the end of the month to really get word to us that this is going to happen. So that's, you know, again, it's kind of fluid. We're flexible, but we don't want to be, we need to be respectful of your time too. You know, we want to, you know, mid-July, we want to meet and decide on the slate of projects. And so I think that should be our general target. Mid-July would be nice to have this stuff ironed out.
And just one thing that I know, Phil, I've talked to you about this, but I just want to air it to the rest of the committee is when you have an application, 4 applications from one developer or even 2, I hope that capacity will be something you will look at because of the strict timelines. I'm just anxious that our DRI funds can get used in the specified time, and get projects done. Thank you.
That's a good point, and that will be, part of the follow-up conversation with them, and part of the consideration for the LPC in terms of how many of these 4 project proposals the committee would want to include in that group of recommended projects. So right, their ability to take on 4 simultaneous development projects would require a pretty high level of capacity. So that's definitely one consideration of several.
Bill, is it also possible to get some sense from this developer group if they were to prioritize the 4 project requests? How would they lay that out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that can definitely be part of the conversation to see, which of the projects is most ready to go. Literally just need this funding requirement and we're ready to break ground versus, other proposals they have may still need some design work or other things. So that can absolutely be part of the follow-up with them. All right, I'm going to keep us moving along here. This another from the same sponsor for the Meng and Schaefer buildings in between Main Street and Division to redevelop those 2 into 4 apartments, 2 commercial spaces with a courtyard in between them that could be used by those commercial tenants. This is adjacent to the Glenny building, which had been mentioned before. This project proposal is requesting $750,000 in DRI funding support out of a total project cost of $2.6 million. Again, these are vacant buildings currently on Main Street, close to that Main Street Commons proposal that we've discussed before. Any initial thoughts or reactions to this one or questions we can follow up on? All right, if not, we'll go on to the next one. This is the corner of Clinton and Division. So this is down the street from the 2 project proposals at the corner of Main and Clinton that we discussed earlier, and across Division Street from the Mortimer Street Garage. This proposal is to redevelop that building into a mixed-use commercial building with office space on the 2nd floor and retail or service space on the 1st floor, requesting $750,000 out of a project cost of little over $2.8 million. So any questions, reactions to this one, thinking about, transformative or catalytic potential here? And hearing none.
I would just like to say it's a great project. It really is. I think that building is actually significantly newer than the others that we're talking about, but it still is a building that's been vacant for many, many years. And it really, I think it's important to, because as you mentioned, the 2 buildings that we see in the picture immediately to the left of this are 2 of the other buildings that are in some of the other proposals. Mm-hmm. So it would really be a shame to, find out that we do something with those other ones and this one is left behind. So however it happens, it would be great to see something happen with this one. So.
And Dana, to your point, if Division Street is rethought through a whole series of different projects, this becomes a gateway property.
Right.
To them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because the other side of it is the parking garage. So
both Both good points. All right, 2 projects left. This proposal is to renovate a sidewalk level space in the Sibley building into a community health center. This project sponsor, his branches, has an existing clinic. They're looking to expand into the downtown to create a storefront medical and mental health clinic. They are purposefully locating across the street from the RTS transit center to help just increase accessibility to their services. And the space would also include a retail pharmacy. So they're looking to upgrade, renovate, fit out that unoccupied storefront space that sits on Clinton Street. They are requesting $1 million out of a total project cost of $2.5 million. Any thoughts on this one in terms of, meeting a need downtown, its transformative or catalytic capacity? Any other questions that we could follow up on?
I guess my only question is, assuming that they're working with the owners of the Sibley building on this space, they're in conversations about
Yes.
utilizing it. That would be my only.
Right. Yes, I will confirm that, but I believe, yes, that they're in discussions with them for this space.
Bill, the only question I would have you ask them is whether this clinic has to be constructed. I only know a little bit about this one thing that I want to say. There's this thing called Article 28 that guides the construction of clinics or hospitals or medical spaces. And it comes with a lot of requirements. And I just wonder if maybe you can ask them if this particular use falls under that Article 28, and have they considered the additional costs, just so we're clear that 2.5 or 2.6 really is adequate for the project?
Mm-hmm. And is that a local or a state requirement?
I believe it's the New York State Public Health Law, Article 28. It might just be for hospitals, but like I said, I'm like, I have half the knowledge here, enough to be dangerous, but just ask.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to ask if they have proposals within the state, because depending on what the purpose or use is, there's different certificates of need and applications that have to be filled out. Also, in addition, with any retail pharmacy.
Okay, yeah, that's a great follow-up for them.
That makes a huge difference on timeline too, if they haven't started that process with the state, I believe.
This is Lisa. Hi. I'm also interested in knowing if is this a not-for-profit or a for-profit company that's going to offer mental health clinic and storefront medical?
Mm-hmm. Sarah Brent, if you're on, I can't remember which they fall under. I know that they do have an existing clinic facility where they do offer these services, and I believe they have either a stated focus or just happen particularly youth, and including transgendered youth and others who have traditionally have kind of difficulty accessing healthcare. So I believe that is part of their kind of overall mission, but I don't recall for sure if they're.
Well, it is a nonprofit, and before anyone thinks I'm intelligent, I'm getting texts from Sarah Brent, who's having a technical difficulty right now. Time I jump in, it's actually Sarah Brent texting me saying, giving me the answers. So.
Very good. Well, thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. His branch it's a nonprofit. They have a facility in the 19th Ward on Arnett Boulevard, and they have another facility over in the Beechwood area. So they've been, Dr. Morehouse and his folks have been actively involved in healthcare for many, many years. And, we know a couple things about our center city. One is it's a food desert, and the other it's a healthcare desert. There really is not much in the center city area in terms of healthcare. So this is actually an exciting project. And to build on the comment that I think Ann made, we are in the process of building a healthcare clinic right now at 819 West Main Street, and it does have to be built to Article 28 standards. So we are working with that, and a lot of the things are pretty straightforward, like the doors have to be 36 inches wide and counters can only be a certain height, and there has to be a certain amount of ventilation and things like that. So, I mean, they're not impossible regulations, but they are regulations that have to be met for a clinic. So.
Mhm. Great. I want to make sure we get to our last project proposal and then can kind of wrap things up so we leave time for public comment period. The last but not least, again, no particular order here. This proposal is to renovate 3 pretty significant buildings, the Granite, the Atrium, and the Gateway buildings, 340,000 square feet of space to create mixed income housing, as well as 80,000 square feet of commercial space. So this and the one a couple slides ago at the corner of Division and Clinton are really the only 2 that kind of have a significant commercial space component. This request is between 4 and 4.5 million out of a total project cost of about 119 million. So definitely a significant project. This is one where purchase negotiations to get site control are underway. So, follow-up conversations just to track the status of that and to, make sure it is on track to have site control or to flag any issues if that's not the case. So just quickly in our last couple minutes, because I do want to make sure we have our public comment period, any initial thoughts, reactions, questions on this proposal?
Bill, for such a big ask, would you ask them to break it out into building per building so it's easier to maybe choose one and not, or is it a one or none as far as they're concerned? Just to make it more feasible.
Right, that could be a follow-up conversation. As Chris had mentioned, it might be a question of reducing the scope from all 3 buildings to focus on the one that they think is, closest to ready to break ground. So that can be part of that follow-up discussion.
Does the total project cost have to be spent within those 2 years?
No, they just have to be started breaking ground. We like to see it within 2 years. Projects do get a later start sometimes if there's engineering and design involved, but that counts also. So as long as they're working on the project, it's moving. We have about 4 years to make sure that, there's a shovel in the ground.
There may be a need. I'm going to put the parking issue on the table again, because depending on what gets funded, if everybody says we're going to put our people in the Mortimer Street garage, it's only got 600 spaces and there are commercial tenants in there too. So if, depending on how much housing ends up happening, the parking issue does need to be addressed directly.
Is there a zoning requirement for stuff like that?
No.
There isn't, okay.
No, but there's a market requirement if you're looking at the ability to succeed.
Yeah.
You got to address it.
And to get financing, right?
Probably, yeah.
And just quickly, Phil, there is a breakout within their proposal, at least with the Granite building in terms of the numbers. So
okay,
detail, but we need to get more.
Okay, good. All right. So just quickly to next steps. First of all, just thank you, committee members. This was a good discussion, raising some initial questions, things that we'll follow up on. As I said, this is the first of really the next 3 meetings, at least, that we'll be talking about these projects in more detail and continuing this discussion. So I think tonight was a great start. As we look ahead, just a reminder, our next LPC meetings, Tammy, you had raised the question of the May 18th meeting date. So it sounds like in the interest of time, because I do want to get to the public comment period, we may, LPC committee members will send around a poll with a couple of scheduling options.
Sounds
So
good.
try to get that rescheduled here pretty quickly so that everyone can get that on their calendar. And then we had polled the group before about interest in a hybrid meeting option to have a in-person location in or near the DRI for committee members who are interested, as well as then continuing the Zoom portion of this. I think particularly those 2 June meetings where we're going to really be continuing the discussion, getting into more details would be good candidates for that. So just to kind of keep that in mind as well. So those are scheduled for upcoming meetings, moving towards our end of July deadline for the strategic investment plan. Reminder again, plug for May 4th public open house. Please encourage people you know, residents, employees, community members to come to MCC and hang out with us, learn about these project proposals, let us know what they think. We really do want to hear from as many people as we can. That public support is part of the project profiles that we'll be putting together. And so we want to be able to demonstrate, that the projects that have strong public support, that's, again, one of the factors that we're looking at. And so with that, I want to thank our committee members for your time and conversation tonight. And Steve, I can't really see the participant list, but we can open it up if there are members of the public who have been listening in during this meeting, if they want
We've had
to.
more people participating. We're down to, a smaller handful at this point. I have opened up the chat for anyone to put in comments about this. And I've also allowed everyone on the attendees to speak. You look like you are muted, and I'm going to ask each of you to unmute. I'm not asking you to make a comment. I'm just giving you the opportunity just to be on the safe side, because just to make sure I'm completely giving you the option. So again, just a few, and they've been participating the entire time, the ones who are still here. So.
I'm just going to say, as not a public person, that picture is really outdated because it still has the rainbow shop on it.
I'm sure
Thank
we
you,
have a more recent one on a sunny day we can replace this one with.
All right.
So if there are no public comments as part of this, I will just reiterate that May 4th meeting, that is a great opportunity for anyone to come learn about these project proposals, get an update on the process, and to really, let us know which are the projects that people are most excited about, the ones they would really love to see move forward, because that's just one of the many factors we're considering. So help us spread the word on that, about our May 4th open house. And that, again, that's a hybrid meeting. So there'll be a in-person meeting at MCC, as well as we'll be kind of simulcasting it on Zoom, the presentation portion. And then there'll be kind of a survey component for people to fill out to let us know what they're thinking.
And
Hey,
so
Phil?
I just want to read out loud, Marshall. We got a couple of comments in here, which I think, just for the record, for people who don't see it, that I think that one of the projects that involves the public space needs to be a priority. It's not all about building renovations. The public realm is super important. So thank you for that one. And can we schedule a field trip as one? Lisa Barron, our team, to all of the sites. Lisa, you wanted to speak to that?
Wait a minute.
And just, I'll just, if I could just interject also, that is being done in a few other DRIs and it's a good way to just kind of see the projects and where they sit in the little district, the district that we're doing here. So,
and the weather's getting better.
And the weather's getting better, so.
Well, yeah, I think it would be important to just physically go and see some of these buildings. If we could even get inside the door of a couple just to see the,
Interesting idea.
the challenges, right, of
Yeah.
what these people are proposing. That would be helpful too, I think.
Yeah.
Well, maybe Friday, Phil and Steve, we can talk on
Yep.
our, about logistics.
On the coordination
Get
call.
something like that done.
Yeah,
And
good
then, once we can throw a few dates out, maybe we'll do a quick doodle poll and to see who might want to participate in something like that.
Absolutely.
All right. I want to say thanks to Phil. My job's getting easier and easier as I get older.
All right. Well, we are at 7 o'clock, a couple minutes before. Just thanks again, committee members. Really appreciate your time tonight, your thoughtful